Hello again everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to revisit the festival of sheepshearing. In part 1 I shared the work of Geoffrey Gagan, who identified many similarities, themes and connections between the 4 biblical sheepshearing accounts. Today I am going to expand upon his conclusions and add further evidence to support my assertion that the festival of sheepshearing represents the pre-trib rapture, as the timing of the harvest of the sheep fleece. As a reminder of Geoffrey Gagan's work, I provide here a summary of the 4 main stories and his conclusion. Jacob takes what rightfully belongs to him for tending Laban's flocks, Genesis 31. Tamar lures Judah into a sexual encounter to secure her rightful progeny, Genesis 38. David seeks compensation for protecting Nabal's flocks, 1 Samuel 25, and Absalom kills Amnon for raping his sister Tamar, 2 Samuel 13. An analysis of the relevant texts reveals that sheepshearing in ancient Israel was a significant celebration characterized by feasting, heavy drinking, and the settling of old scores. As a result of these associations, sheepshearing became an ideal backdrop for events in Israel's past involving the repayment of debts or the righting of wrongs. Because both David and Absalom took advantage of sheepshearing for this purpose, and in the process aided their own ascents to the throne, sheepshearing became intimately associated with the emergence of the royal clan and the establishment of the Davidic dynasty. As an introduction to the deeper study, we must first revisit the story of Tamar. In this story, Tamar seeks to secure a progeny that was unfairly denied her by her wicked husbands and thereafter Onan. Tamar was of Mesopotamia, as was Abraham, but she was not of Abraham. Thus representing the Gentiles, she sought progeny and inclusion of her offspring into the Abrahamic bloodline. Having been denied of her promised marriage to Shelah, she sought justice by luring Judah into a sexual encounter during sheepshearing. That she secured the royal seal, cord and staff is symbolic of the Gentiles being grafted in. Would it not be fitting then that the pre-trib rapture of the church and Gentiles take place during sheepshearing? It later came to pass that Tamar gave birth to twins. As she travailed, Zara put out his hand, upon which scarlet thread was tied. As we know from Isaiah 1:18, sin be as scarlet, thus representative of the Jews. However, it was Perez that came out first, representative of the Gentiles. As we can see from the story of Tamar, its symbolism is extremely relevant to the pre-trib rapture. Wine and a merry heart equals festival of sheepshearing. Now I will briefly return to 2 of the other sheepshearing accounts in reading the following verses. 1 Samuel 25 verses 36 through 37. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king, and Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing, less or more, until the morning light. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. 2 Samuel 13 verse 28. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. And when I say unto you, smite Amnon, then kill him. Fear not, have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. And from the Apocrypha, the Testament of Judah, the 4th son of Jacob and Leah, chapter 12 verse 3. Therefore, being drunk with wine, I did not recognize her, and her beauty deceived me through the fashion of her adorning. Whilst we can see the words merry, heart, and wine are all present in the first 2 passages, they are not in the third. However, I don't believe this 3rd verse disqualifies the assertion that wine and a merry heart equals the festival of sheepshearing. Please consider the following reading of Esther 1 as further evidence for all my conclusions thus far.
The Book of Esther, Chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces, being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, and the honour of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, and when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Arbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mares, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she hath not performed the commandment of King Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honour, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people.
In Esther chapter 1, we see Vashti, representative of the Jews, refusing to come at the king's commandment. Once again, at a time of wine and a merry heart. Here the commandment goes out that Vashti comes no more before the king, and her royal estate be given unto one better than she. The parallels to Tamar here are apparent, as Tamar secured Judah's royal seal, cord, and staff, and also secured progeny. It is widely acknowledged that Esther represents believers in Jesus Christ. In the following 3 verses, Esther is offered half of the kingdom. Esther chapter 5, verse 3. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. Esther chapter 5, verse 6. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Esther chapter 7 verse 2. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. To add further weight to my conclusion, I believe the only other instance in the Bible of wine and merry heart is Ecclesiastes chapter 9 verse 7. Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. Ruth chapter 3 verse 7 also seems a possibility. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn, and she came softly, and uncovered his feet, and laid her down. The word drunk here in Strong's is H8354. Whilst this word means to imbibe or banquet, its meaning is an intensive of H8248, meaning to quaff, moisten, or water. Ruth chapter 3 verse 2. And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. We see here that Boaz was winnowing barley in the night time. It seems unlikely then that Boaz was drunk in this instance. However, worthy of note is that the barley harvest occurs after the festival of sheep-shearing has concluded. Now I will turn to the story of Herod and the timing of the beheading of John the Baptist. The chain of events can be followed in Mark chapter 6 verses 27 through 44, Luke chapter 9 verses 7 through 17, Matthew chapter 14 verses 10 through 21, and John chapter 6 verses 1 through 14. Bill Harriman summarizes these events as follows. Herod sends the executioner to Machaerus. John's disciples receive a headless corpse, bury it, walk up to Galilee, find Jesus, and tell him the news. Then Jesus withdraws, finds his disciples, relocates to a grassy slope outside Bethsaida, and the crowds find him there, feeding the 5,000. That unbroken chain of action must take place in between the party and a time which was still not yet Passover. By all reasonable estimates, those logistics require 1 to 3 weeks. At the party, Antipas quoted the Old Testament. When Salome pleased him with her dancing, the Tetrarch of Galilee offered her anything she wanted up to half my kingdom. These were the words of Ahasuerus to Esther. Nothing we know about Herod Antipas suggests that he was given to quote in Scripture, but a party 2 weeks before Passover was a party 2 weeks after Purim. Surely Herod had also taken the excuse to throw a similar party on the second night of Purim, which was the Feast of Esther, and surely that night's entertainment would have included a professional oration of the dramatic tale of Esther in Persia. Not only is the quotation at issue the climax of that story, but the exact wording gets repeated 3 times. Not only does that quotation make a memorable part of the story, but Antipas and all his guests would have been extremely familiar with the story, having heard it once a year for all their lives. So then, 1 to 3 weeks after Purim, Antipas throws another party. He probably threw it in the same palace, with many of the same guests, with some of the preparations being the same and some different. Attending 2 parties like this, upper-class guests would no doubt have in mind the previous one, looking forward to a repeat of certain delights while anticipating some changes as well. In this case, it seems, that feeling must have extended to the entertainment. At Herod's birthday feast, Salome probably danced during a certain part of the evening, at which his guests would expect entertainment. The most natural time for this would have been the same part of the evening the Purim storyteller filled with his speech just as a week or 2 before. In that case, not only would the words of Ahasuerus be fresh in everyone's mind, the timing of Herod's quoting them would have paralleled the recent party. This gives Herod even more reasons to reference the memorable quotation. Given this extra context, it seems the Tetrarch was simply playing to the crowd and reminding them pleasantly of his last party. The timing of the seasonal citation would have perfectly underscored the sense that his exact wording wasn't meant at all literally. For a complementary twist, It has been suggested that Herod's party wasn't about his birthday at all. The Greek word in Mark and Matthew can refer to the birth of his rule over Galilee. The earliest Antipas could possibly claim to have begun that rule was on the death of his father, Herod the Great. By the Hebrew calendar, that day, in 4 BC, fell not less than 5 days after Purim, and not less than 16 days before Passover, based on the calculation of Ptolemy's ride to Antioch and back. In other words, Herod died about 1 or 2 weeks after Purim. Further to Bill Harriman's summary, we can now see that John the Baptist would likely have been beheaded during the festival of Sheepshearing. So in typology, John here would be representative of the Jews, or the fig tree generation being cut down. More on this later. We can also see that Salome being offered up to half my kingdom is a parallel of Esther, and that they are both representative of the church. Now I turn back to Absalom, again looking for a typology. 2 Samuel chapter 14 verses 25 through 26. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. And when he pulled his head, for it was at every year's end that he pulled it, because the hair was heavy on him, therefore he pulled it. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 9. And Absalom met the servants of David. And Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 14. Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand, and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. We can see here Absalom to be a typology of Christ. He was hanged on a tree, pierced 3 times, and without blemish. Visually in the case of Absalom, but in the case of Christ, meaning without sin. His kingdom was rejected, and he also rode upon a mule. As Absalom was without blemish, and as Isaiah 1:18 tells us, sin shall be as wool, I believe it is reasonable to conclude that Absalom was caught in the tree literally by his head, as opposed to his hair. If Absalom's death was also during Passover, his shaven head would be in accordance with the timing of his annual haircut at the year's end. Also worthy of note is that in 2 Samuel chapter 14 verse 26, where the author wrote, he weighed the hair of his head, the author had no trouble in distinguishing between the head and the hair.
Judges 14. And Samson went down to Timnath, and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother, and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Then went Samson down, and his father and his mother, to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath. And behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hand. But he told not his father or his mother what he had done. And he went down, and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time he returned to take her. And he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat. But he told not them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So his father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. And it came to pass, when they saw him, that they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If ye can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets, and 30 change of garments. But if ye cannot declare it me, then shall ye give me 30 sheets, and 30 change of garments. And they said unto him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And he said unto them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that they said unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee, and thy father's house with fire. Have ye called us to take that we have? Is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him, and said, Thou dost but hate me, and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told it me. And he said unto her, Behold, I have not told it my father nor my mother, and shall I tell it thee? And she wept before him the 7 days, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that he told her, because she lay sore upon him, and she told the riddle to the children of her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day before the sun went down, What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, If ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend.
Samson's riddle. Judges chapter 14 verse 14. And he said unto them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness, and they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. How are we to interpret this riddle? I will break it down into 4 parts. Out of the eater. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 24. For the Lord thy God is a consuming fire, even a jealous God. Came forth meat. John chapter 1 verse 14. And the Word was made flesh, and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And out of the strong. Psalm chapter 19 verse 5. Which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race, meaning Samson in typology, or Jesus. And finally, came forth sweetness. Judges chapter 14 verse 3. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. I believe this to mean Samson's wife, or the church. I will return to this later. Judges chapter 14 verse 18. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day before the sun went down, What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, If ye had not ploughed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. Psalm chapter 19 verses 7 through 10. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Numbers chapter 24 verse 8. God brought him forth out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of an unicorn. He shall eat up the nations his enemies, and shall break their bones, and pierce them through with his arrows. In Judges 14, I believe the lion carcass represents the roaring lion of Judah, Jesus, as the sacrificial Lamb of God, the first coming of Christ. And in Samson, Jesus is represented as the strong man, the second coming of Christ. Judges chapter 14 verse 10. So his father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. Young men in Strong's is H970, meaning a youth, choice young man, chosen, and its root is H977, acceptable, choose, excellent. This reminds me of 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. And also Matthew chapter 22 verse 14. For many are called, but few are chosen. Also in this verse we see mention of a feast. As Timnath is mentioned 5 times in Judges 14, I believe this verse alludes to the festival of Sheepshearing, a well-known event in Timnath. This chapter is telling us about a 7-day feast, and, in my opinion, the timing of the pre-trib rapture. The festival of Sheepshearing begins with a feast, representing the dead in Christ, or the harvest of the dressed sheep, and continues with sheep-shearing, the alive in Christ, or the harvest of the sheep fleece. Now let us look for similarities in the following 2 verses. Judges chapter 14 verse 15. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that they said unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have ye called us to take that we have? Is it not so? Genesis chapter 38 verse 24. And it came to pass about 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. In both these verses, stories based in Timnath, we see a party threatened with being burnt. Of course, the pre-trib rapture group had to escape such burning, and here both Tamar and Samson's wife escaped such a fate. Judges chapter 14 verses 12 through 13. And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If ye can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. But if ye cannot declare it me, then shall ye give me 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. And they said unto him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. Now the word sheets means to envelop, a wrapper, or fine linen. And the word riddle, H2420, means a puzzle, or, at its root, H2330, to tie a knot. This sounds very much like a marriage, and we also know fine linen is the righteousness of saints. So where else can we find change or changes of garments? Change of garments can be found 3 times in the Bible, all in Judges 14, and changes of garments can only be found twice, both found in 2 Kings chapter 5.
2 Kings 5. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honourable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valour, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies, and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go to, go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed, and took with him 10 talents of silver, and 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes, and said, Am I God to kill and to make alive? that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elisha the man of God had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot, and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go, and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went away, and said, Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned, and went away in a rage. And his servants came near, and spake unto him, and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? Then went he down, and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules' burden of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said unto him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, Behold, my master hath spared Naaman this Syrian in not receiving at his hands that which he brought. But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him, and take somewhat of him. So Gehazi followed after Naaman. And when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him, and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well. My master hath sent me, saying, Behold, even now there be come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver, and 2 changes of garments. And Naaman said, Be content, take 2 talents. And he urged him, and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags, with 2 changes of garments, and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bare them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hand, and bestowed them in the house. And he let the men go, and they departed. But he went in, and stood before his master. And Elisha said unto him, Whence comest thou, Gehazi? And he said, Thy servant went no whither. And he said unto him, Went not mine heart with thee, when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money, and to receive garments, and oliveyards, and vineyards, and sheep, and oxen, and men servants, and maid servants? The leprosy therefore of Naaman shall cleave unto thee, and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence, a leper as white as snow.
Samson's riddle and Naaman's leprosy. H5283 Naaman, the same as H5282. H5282 from H5276 pleasantness. H5276 a primitive root to be agreeable, literally or figuratively, passing beauty, be delight, be pleasant, be sweet. One example of where this word is used is in Psalm 141 verse 6. When their judges are overthrown in stony places, they shall hear my words, for they are sweet. So now returning to Samson's riddle, Judges 14 verse 14. And he said unto them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. As Naaman means pleasantness or sweetness, I believe this is a confirmation that Samson's riddle has been understood correctly, as Samson's change of garments and Naaman's name lead us to this chapter, 2 Kings 5. In 2 Kings 5, clean is used 4 times, and wash 3 times. Also, the number 2 is used 7 times in verses 22 and 23, which reminds me of Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 2. Thy teeth are like a flock of sheep that are even shorn, which came up from the washing, whereof every one bare twins, and none is barren among them. Now let's look at the similarities between the following 2 verses. 2 Kings chapter 5 verse 14. Then went he down, and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And Judges chapter 14 verse 17. And she wept before him the 7 days, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that he told her, because she lay sore upon him, and she told the riddle to the children of her people. Samson told his wife the answer to his riddle on the 7th day of his wedding feast, a parallel of the festival of sheepshearing, whilst Naaman was washed 7 times, and his flesh became like that of a child. Meanwhile, Gehazi, who represents those who are still of the world, became leprous. 2 Kings chapter 5 verse 26. And he said unto him, Went not mine heart with thee, when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money, and to receive garments, and oliveyards, and vineyards, and sheep, and oxen, and men servants, and maid servants? Here we see Elisha asking, is it a time to receive money, and to receive garments? Is this an acknowledgement of the need for a change of garments? 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 52. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed.
Daniel 5. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whiles he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine, and praised the gods of gold, and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonied. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live for ever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him. whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Forasmuch as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then was Daniel brought in before the king. And the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations, and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines, have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified? Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom, and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances, and art found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided, and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
Samson's riddle, Daniel's hard sentence. Following Samson's revealing of his riddle to his wife on the seventh day, we read Judges chapter 14 verse 19. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. As we know, Samson's feast was in Timnath. H8553 Timnath, from H4487, a portion assigned. H4487, a primitive root, properly to way out, by implication to allot or constitute officially. Number. and Ashkelon H831, probably from H8254 in the sense of weighing place, i.e. mart. The root meanings of Timnath and Ashkelon remind me of Daniel chapter 5 verses 25 through 28. And this is the writing that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. H6537, Peres, corresponding to H6536, to split up, divide. H6536, a primitive root, to break in pieces, to split, distribute. And H3977, balances, a pair of scales, used only one time in the Bible. Daniel chapter 5 verse 12. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. H280, hard sentences, used only once in the Bible, corresponding to H2420, an enigma. Daniel chapter 5 verse 31. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. The man here, pictured on the left, is currently 62 years old, or, to put it another way, about 62 years old. On the right, I have included screenshots from a song by Nick Kershaw called The Riddle. It contains a lot of symbolism, and I believe it is referencing both Samson's riddle and Daniel's hard sentence. As an example, we see a weighing machine in the picture bottom center, marked, I speak your weight. We also see a familiar character involved, Enigma or the Riddler. And finally, some observations from the entire study. Firstly, I put together some verses that confirm that the festival of Sheepshearing is a 7-day feast. The Testament of Judah, the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, chapter 12, verse 2. For it was the law of the Amorites that she who was about to marry should sit in fornication 7 days by the gate. Esther chapter 1 verse 5. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And Judges chapter 14 verse 17. And she wept before him the 7 days, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that he told her, because she lay sore upon him, and she told the riddle to the children of her people. And also, widows in the Bible often represent the desolation of Jerusalem and the Jews. Lamentations chapter 1 verse 1, Jerusalem. How doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations, and princess among the provinces, how is she become tributary? Genesis chapter 38 verse 7 and 10 regarding Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verse 38 regarding Abigail. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal, that he died. Josephus Antiquities book 7 chapter 8 verse 172 regarding Tamar. And she continued as a widow with her brother Absalom a long time, regarding Amnon. And finally, my beliefs regarding the fig tree generation and the end times, using verses to support. 7,000 years, broken down as 4,000 years of the fig tree generation, which includes 1,000 years of the dung year, 2,000 years of the church, running from 30 to 2030 AD, and 1,000 years of the millennial reign. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 8. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The Testament of Judah, the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, chapter 12 verse 1. And after these things, while Tamar was a widow, she heard after 2 years that I was going out to shear my sheep, and adorned herself in bridal array, and sat in the city Enaim by the gate. 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 23. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep-shearers in Baal-hazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Hosea chapter 6 verse 2. After 2 days will he revive us. In the 3rd day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. 2 Samuel chapter 14 verses 27 through 29. And unto Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of fair countenance. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, and saw not the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab, to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the 2nd time, he would not come. In all 4 of these verses, the number 2 represents the 2,000 years that God has hidden his face from Israel. In 2 Samuel chapter 14, the king's face is referenced 3 times, in order that we pay attention to its meaning. Also, 2 of these verses relate to both Tamar's being widowed, again representing the Jews. 2 Samuel chapter 3 verse 20. And he said, Well, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, that is, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verse 2, regarding Nabal. And there was a man in Maon, whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Luke chapter 13 verses 7 through 9. Then said he unto the dresser of his vineyard, Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down, why cumbereth it the ground? And he answering said unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. Matthew chapter 3 verses 7 through 10. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees came to his baptism, he said unto them, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bring forth therefore fruits meet for repentance, and think not to say within yourselves, We have Abraham to our father. For I say unto you that God is able of these stones to raise up children unto Abraham. And now also the axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down, and cast into the fire.